Hi and welcome to Okie Manor. I'm Mrs. Okie and this is your introduction to canning. First thing I'm going to tell you is get you a canning book before you even buy your canner, okay? So I like the Ball Book of Preserving. Really good book. Take time, get familiar with the recipes. It's really good even if you don't can. If you're not sure about cooking, has great information in there. But I need you to get the book, open up to the beginning, and learn the basics about canning, okay? The second thing you need to do is to make sure your workstation is clean. You're pretty much like a factory, a food factory. You want to make sure everything's clean, everything's sanitized. Here are some of the few things that you will need when you start out with canning. Your canning jars. This is a wide mouth, 16-ounce glass jar. It is tempered glass. It is made for high pressure canning, okay? This is the wide mouth, and it also comes in a different size, which is called a regular mouth. The only difference is size of the openings. I personally like wide mouths, but you can use the regular mouths if you're doing like chicken stocks. But anything chunky or thick, you want easily to clean and easily to get it out, I like wide mouth, okay? Now the type of lid that you're going to use is a two-part lid. You have your lid and your ring. Your lids have this wonderful part right here that seals it, okay? It's kind of like a gasket. So you don't have to fool around with a gasket. This is your sealing compound that's right here. And then your rings. So whenever you have your glass jars, you want to make sure that there's no nicks. Of course, clean and sterilize, but you want to run your finger across the top. Make sure there's no nicks, no breaks, because once this goes on there, it seals down. And this will be the only thing that's keeping the air out and keeping your product fresh. Okay? So just a few things that you will need. If you're lucky enough to get a starter kit, you will get a funnel. You will get your jar lifter. And this pretty much works like this. You grab the top of your jar, okay? It's a jar lifter, because you don't want to be reaching your hand inside that canner. It gets hot. Then you have your debubbler. Helps to get the air bubbles out. Once your product is in here, you're going to use this to slide around the edge to get the air bubbles out. Also on the other end, this is your headspace tool. So you will put it on the edge and you will be able to measure. If this tip touches the food and the rim of your jar, that's a 1-inch headspace. Then you have 3/4, half, and 1/4. I'll explain later about headspace, okay? You're also going to need a little bit of vinegar. Doesn't matter, just good straight white vinegar to clean the top of your jars. And you're going to need some oil. I'll explain what you need the oil for in 1 second. And in order to get your lids out, some new canning starter kits won't have it, but this basically is a jar lid lifter. And it's magnetized so that you can get this out of the hot water. Ball says you no longer have to use hot water to soften your lids first. I still like to do it just to make sure everything's clean and sanitized. Hot water, not boiling, okay? So basically the reason why you use a two-part lid, right, is you put your food in, you put your lid, and then you put your ring on, finger tight, okay? You don't crank it down there like you're trying to keep it from spilling out in the refrigerator. You just very loosely center your ring and twist it, fingertip tight, using your fingertips, not your palm. That's what fingertip tight means, okay? Now these lids will make a ping sound when they're cool. I don't know if you can really see this, but you can see the slight indentation that's right there. That is going to sink in and let you know that your can is sealed. Now, although we say canning, we do understand that this is a jar, but it's the same process as canning when you get the aluminum cans. All right, now I'm going to introduce you to the actual canner. I like to use Presto canners. There are several different models of canners out there. I do want to let you know there is a difference between pressure canners and pressure cookers. A lot of you out there use the Instant Pot. That is a digital pressure cooker. That is not a pressure canner, and it's really not rated for pressure canning. So there's two different types of canning. There's water bath canning, and then there's pressure canning. Water bath canning, you would just basically fill up a large pot, such as this, with hot water, submerge your jars, and then process them at the amount of time that's necessary. That is for high acid foods, such as tomatoes and certain fruits. Low acid foods, such as potatoes and meats and certain vegetables, would need to be pressure canned. You do not fill it all the way up, okay? You would fill it up pretty much about here with water. There's a marker on the inside. Put your jars in, and then you will process it. And then the steam builds up, and you will be able to preserve your food. So just to walk you through some of the parts, this is a Presto 23-quart pressure canner, okay? So this right here is your pressure regulator. Once your steam has vented from your canner, you will put this on there in order to regulate the pressure, okay? Let's talk about the lid here. The lid here has several moving parts. This is your steam valve. This is your dial gauge. You're going to put your pressure regulator on that steam valve right there. It's going to get to rocking just a little bit, and I'll explain more about that later as we go. And then you're going to have your nib here. This is your emergency pressure release valve. This will stay, but just make sure that it is able to be moved. Your stem valve right here, you need to be able to see through it, see light through it, okay? And then here is your airlock. When you're using your pressure canner, your airlock, once the pressure has started to build, will come up like this, and it will stay up the entire time that there is pressure in your canner. You cannot open your canner while this is up at all. You wait until that airlock drops and your dial says 0. Now, your dial can say 0 and your pressure lock can still be up because there's still some amount of pressure in there. We'll go through that later. On the other side is a very important piece right here, and this is your gasket, okay? This gasket in the Presto models needs to be oiled every, let's just say, 3 or 4 uses. But you need to check and make sure that it's oiled properly before you use it. There are some canners that do not have this gasket, such as the All-American. Those are wonderful canners, but it's just not in my price bracket, okay? So you would set your lid, and it's foolproof. It's not like you're gonna blow your top, okay? You set it on there, and you notice that there are grooves right here. And the grooves match the indents that's on the inside of the pot. So you would line it up, and then you would twist it closed, like that, okay? So before we do that, we want to make sure that our gasket is oiled. That's where the oil is going to come into contact. You get a little piece of paper, like that. You dip it in your oil, like that. Any type of clean vegetable oil. You really don't want to use olive oil in this instance because olive oil doesn't have a high enough smoke point and it can make it kind of gummy. So you want to go in there with your finger and go right around the inside of that gasket like that. Hope you can see. Right around there, and then right around the top, because this is the part where metal will meet metal if that gasket wasn't there, and you want that gasket to be nice and oiled so that it's smoother when you get ready to open it. You don't want to over oil this gasket, okay? And then you will put it on there like so, and give it a few turns just to make sure everything is smooth. You see that? Hear that click? That means it's secure. There's no way that this lid can come off. So I know a lot of you are scared, thinking about your pressure cooker or it's going to explode. This is not going to explode if you do what's necessary. If anything, if the pressure does get too high to the point where the can can't handle it, what's going to happen is that little plug is going to come out. But you're not going to have that trouble because you're going to follow directions. All right, now to show you the inside. So inside of my pressure canner, I have this rack. You never want to put your jars directly on the bottom of your pressure canner. If you put them directly on the bottom of your pressure canner, that's full of direct heat, and you do not want that. So always use your rack. If you look inside, mine has been used pretty well, you can kind of see the line of demarcation that's right here, where you can see where the water is. Once you get your own, there's a little line right here that tells you that's the minimum amount of water that should be in there. You never want, when you're pressure canning, to put too much water in there and your jars are floating, because your jars can move around too much and break. The water does not have to cover the entire jar. Now, although this is a 23-quart pressure cooker, you're not going to put 23-quart jars in here. This is 23 quarts if you were to use liquid volume, like if you were to use it as a stock pot. So this will hold about 14 quarts and about 20 pints, give or take. All right? So you would put your clean pressure canner, put it down, you put your rack in, and then once you put your product in, your cans, okay, you'll put them in there like so, with the water that's filled up. All right, so I want to make sure that everybody understands a couple things. You have to understand thermal shock. Thermal shock will happen when you put something that's cold and something that's hot together. One of the two is not going to win the fight. And normally it's not going to be your glass jars. So if you are raw packing, which means raw food goes in that's cold, you want the water to go in your canner to be cold, okay? Not necessarily cold, but room temperature, okay? And so you put the water in there, the minimum that's for your canner, and then you set your jars in there, cold. And you're bringing everything up to temperature at once. So you have a clean, sterilized jar, you have your food, your seasonings, and your room temperature water, and then you set your jars in. You put your lid on, you put your canner onto the stove, and then you start your warming process. Just as a demonstration, let's pretend that this jar was full. You're going to put the jar here, the canner here, excuse me. You're going to secure your lid. If it wants to go on properly, right? Okay, well, I'll have to edit that out. All right, you put your lid on and you secure it. You would turn your stove on. I would say turn your stove on high, okay? And then you're going to eventually start to hear the water boiling here. You're going to see steam come out of this pipe here. Let the steam come out. Once you have a steady flow of steam coming out of your vent pipe, then you're going to count for 10 minutes. That 10 minutes is going to have enough time for the remaining air that's in your canner, between the water and the top of the canner, that air needs to come out, so that the only pressure in there is the steam pressure, okay? So you're going to set your timer for 10 minutes. Once your timer is set for 10 minutes and that goes off, you may start to notice that your dial gauge is going to go up just a little bit, okay? Then you're going to put your pressure regulator on top of the steam valve. This is going to come up, which is your airlock, okay? You're going to put your pressure regulator on there, and then you start watching your dial. For me, in my altitude, it's 10 pounds of pressure. Read your book and find out what your altitude is. If you don't know what your altitude is, Google what's my altitude and your zip code, okay? So I am in a place where I'm under 1,000 feet, between 0 and 1,000 feet. So my altitude for canning is 10 pounds of pressure. So I would check this. Once it gets up to about 10 pounds of pressure, you're going to start to see this kind of rock a little bit. That's when you're going to turn your stove down, once you reached your pressure. And you're going to turn it down slowly, not immediately down to like a simmer. Eventually it's going to be a simmer. And once you're at your pounds per pressure for your altitude, you're going to let it hold. Now, I will tell you this. You don't always have to have a dial on your pressure canner. Some pressure canners that have a dial have a pressure regulator because you're going to read the pressure off of the dial. Some pressure canners, the dial gauge is broken, or they prefer to not have one. And then you're going to use your weights. This is a weighted. They look the same, but there is a difference. This one you can remove. If you take the top off like this, you can remove the weights. So by itself, it will equal 5 pounds of pressure. Then you add another one, and it's 10 pounds of pressure. And then you add another weight on top of that, and you have 15 pounds of pressure. So this whole thing right here, because it's all 3 pieces, is 15 pounds of pressure. So for me, mind you, I mentioned that I would have to can my said item at 10 pounds per pressure. So I would have taken one of these off, which I just threw in the floor by mistake. So anyway, you would take yours off and put the top back on it, and that would be what you would use. But for right now, I'm just going to use my pressure regulator because my dial has been tested and it's still good. That's the other thing. If you are a canner, once a year or once every 2 years, you should probably get your pressure canner tested. You can look up your state plus local extension. So for example, if you were in Virginia, you would say Virginia Local Extension Office. That is brought to you by your local university and the agricultural department for home canners. What they do is you can set up an appointment and they will test your dial gauge to make sure that it is measuring the correct pressure. Okay? So again, let's come on back. So now, after the 10 minutes, all of your air has vented out. You've put your pressure regulator or your weight, whichever one you're using, on top. Now you're holding your pressure. That is when you start your timer. Once your pressure has reached your 10 pounds per pressure and holding, okay? And then you process at your time. For example, I'm getting ready to do sweet potatoes. So for me, I will put my sweet potatoes in there, and then I will turn the stove on, and I will cut it on high and bring it up to temperature. And then I'm going to hear the water boiling. I'm going to start to see steam coming out of here, and it's possible that my airlock may rise up. Once I've seen steam come out of here, I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes. And I'm going to wait at the end of the 10 minutes of seeing a steady flow of steam, which is really noticeable. You'll know the difference, okay? You're going to go ahead and put your regulator or your weight on. And then it's going to go up to the pounds of pressure that you need, and you're going to slowly turn your stove down to the proper simmering, okay? And then at that point, you start your timer. So for me, for sweet potatoes, if I have pint jars, which are this size ones, 16 ounces, I would process those sweet potatoes for about an hour and 5 minutes. That time and that recipe is located in your book. Read your book for your canner and read your book for whatever you're canning, okay? I cannot stress that enough. I can answer some questions for you, but the knowledge is yours. It's in your hand. You have to read the book. Now, I know some of you may be asking, why are you canning? Can't you just go to the store and buy it? You're right, I can go to the store and buy it, but I didn't cook that. I don't know what's in it. And also, if I have a garden, which I actually do, I may have a surplus of something and I can't use it all right now. I may catch a good sale at the store. I can't use it all right now. Now, I have something that is shelf stable. Once it is in these jars, it's good for 1 to 2 years. There are people who have had stuff preserved and saved for much longer than that. It depends on the product and how long it can be saved. Now, you do have to remember, now you're basically like a factory. Your kitchen is becoming a food factory. You have to make sure that you use sterilization practices to keep the surfaces clean, to keep the jars clean, and to make sure that everything that goes in there is clean and fresh. I will tell you, canning stuff is like preserving stuff in time. Like if you take something and you put it in the freezer, it is at that particular state, frozen in time. So is canning. The only difference is it's cooked and then it's sealed in time. Okay? So if it wasn't the best piece of meat, the best piece of produce, you're not going to have quality product. So I'm not telling you that you have to go out and get all organic. You get what you can afford. Okay? But what I am telling you is make sure it is at the best health for you. So if you're doing potatoes and it's a brown spot, go ahead and cut that out. If you're doing meat and the meat is, 2 days from going bad, you don't want to can that. You can the freshest items possible, okay? Because this is what's going to be saved for your family, all right? All right, so I hope I got your interest piqued, and I hope you'll come with me on this canning journey for today. Because for me, I've been in this for about 10 years, and I want you to come with me on the canning journey. You never know what's going on in the grocery stores, and you can be the person to know, hey, I grew this, or I bought it, and I cooked it. I know exactly what's in it. You don't have to worry about extra preservatives or anything like that. Oh, one other thing. Again, why can it? You're canning it to make sure that you're killing all of the bacteria that's in there. You definitely do not want to skip a step, because your canner, the internal temperature is going to get it to about 240 degrees to make sure that everything in there that doesn't belong is gone, to keep your family safe. Now, reading the manual is very important, because there's something called botulism, and you definitely don't want to produce any type of food that could be potential harm to you or your family. So again, welcome to Oki Manor, and I hope you join me in another video.